Oh, and I realized that I haven't talked about consoles. I asked Heath
Okay,
about
cool.
that.
Yeah.
I asked Heath about something specific, if anybody had any specific consoles that they were talking about. If anybody's got a specific question about a console, maybe I know what we can do. But otherwise, the main thing about using consoles that I really find fascinating is, once again, it's that inspiration aspect to it. So, our kids are so used to just working on mouses and looking on computer screens. Having that tactile environment really is fun. And so, one of the things that I try to do is, I I would set up like what's called delay throws for my students. And basically, you set up a microphone and you put it in front, and then you have a five or six different delays and reverbs, however many you have around, plugged into your Mackie or your Presonus or whatever console you've got in the classroom, and have them where they can feed that vocal into it, and they can push the fader up and down, and they can create throws. And so they can, and they this is how they learn time-based processing. So you could set one delay up to an eighth note delay, and they can go hello, 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 hello. Or then they could go, or have one set up to a quarter note delay, hello, 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 and on and on. And they can move the faders up and down, and they can start blending, and they can really get a tactile feel to what's going on. And a lot of times that inspires them to embrace learning more about effects and about effects processing. That's something that I do with consoles when I'm teaching on smaller format consoles. Another big one that I highly recommend is subgrouping. Um, Something that we think, okay, well, we have 16 channels in front of us or 24 channels in front of us. I have one EQ, and I may have a compressor if it's a digital console, and that's what I have. And I'm like, no, let's take these 5 drum mics or 8 drum mics and send them all to a subgroup, and then let's process them together. And what a lot of times what that subgrouping does by processing them there first is, one, you take a lot of the stress off of trying to process each element individually, because you may not have to after you subgroup. That's a huge thing that I do a lot. And I'll compress the drum mix a little bit, add a little bit of EQ, and all of a sudden everything feels good. The subgrouping, what it does is it kind of provides a bit of glue. It glues things together. And so when I'm on a console, I'm constantly using subgroups as best I can. I know, like the famous old school Mackie 1604 VLZ, it had 4 groups, and I would use those up in a second. So that's a huge one that I do. Creative ways to use auxiliaries. You can go into side chaining. Side chaining, something that you could do where um, you could take a gate. A lot of times these digital consoles, they have gates inside the digital console. What you could do is you could set it up where every time, let's say, the kick drum hits the bass, it sends to a gate that's on the bass, and it opens up the bass. So let's say that you've got a bass player who's playing do 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 or whatever, but you don't really like the bass player playing that way. You wanted the bass player to follow more with the pattern that the kick drum is playing, like a boop, bop, boop, boop, bop. What you can do is every time that kick drum hits, it triggers the gate on the bass channel, and it opens up the gate. Yeah. And so in that way, every time the bass hits, it goes bump, 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 bump. And then so I start them off by showing them that little trick, by using side chaining and gates. And then we can get into EDM, and basically EDM would not exist without the pumping. And that's what it is. It's side chaining. And then, depending on how old my audience is and how, if they're 18 years or older, then I'll pull out Dr. Dre albums and things like that, and basically explain, that hip hop wouldn't exist without side chaining. And so kind of giving them a historical perspective. All of this stuff is facilitated much easier on a console than trying to introduce these concepts inside of like Pro Tools or GarageBand or something like that. So those are some creative ways that I use the console when I'm teaching. Hope that helps.
Yeah. So, Charlie, so much of that is like really great information, and I'm just like, oh crap, for real? So, wow, super, and even the trick about like just like the taping with that Shure mic, I'm like, oh my god, wow, 30 minutes of information that's like like a semester. So, uh, yeah. So those of you, like, those that are here, uh, if you've got comments, questions, and Andy, uh, like as Charlie's been talking, Andy's been adding links over here to some of these products that he's trying to add the names like the analog things like over in the chat window, and I'll be exporting the chat window so that links and stuff over there too. So, but yeah, so now like questions or comments, I want to say, hey, could you talk in the chat box? I'll be glad to pass that along. So yeah, so let's.
Heath, I didn't catch too much of that because I don't know if it's my internet signal or your internet signal that's a little bit off, but I trust you. If there's anybody that's got questions, I'll be glad to answer them.
I'm just curious if you'll talk a little bit more about that 57 hack. Like, what does the taping work? I know you said that it's a vent, but I'm just curious a little bit more of the technical aspect.
Sure. So basically, most microphones, most dynamic microphones, what happens there is in order to make them directional, they use phase cancellation. And so inside of this body here, you've got little channels, and those channels kind of vent and they zigzag throughout. And this is the vent that allows that air to come in. And so you've got air hitting the diaphragm, which makes the diaphragm vibrate. But on the other side, you've also got air coming in there. What they're doing is that air that's coming through the vent, it's a delay. It's still catching the audio, just like the diaphragm on the front side. But the delayed time is such that it actually cancels out partially, meaning that there are certain places within the spectrum that no longer sound exist. And so, like I said, with a cardioid, it's hard for me to draw it, but for a cardioid from here, it's like it makes this kind of heart shape, and everything within the heart is what it picks up. Everything this way, it cancels out. And what it is that channel, however long that channel is inside of it, it delays it to the point where that cancellation is focused in on there. And so basically, it's a mechanical function that provides directionality inside of these dynamic mics. And by you eliminating that port, basically there's nothing there but the diaphragm itself. And so the diaphragm, all diaphragms are omnidirectional. They don't provide the directionality. It's usually something else within the componentry of the mic that provides the directionality. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. That's
Cool.
just neat.
Yeah. And so, yeah, any mic like that, any dynamic mic, if you look for them, there's usually a port somewhere. Some of them have the port down the side, like Electro Voice mics have the port. Same thing applies. You can cover it with tape. Some of them have them near the rear. Wherever that port is, just you can easily, before you even tape it up, just put your finger over it and see. And all of a sudden, you'll probably feel it where it picks up a lot more of the room. And so that's a great trick to have. Most people, they shy away from using omnidirectional mics because obviously it picks up everything. You would kind of think that that might not be the best thing. But one thing that omnidirectionals have an advantage for is they have no proximity effect. Proximity effect is what happens when you go up to the mic, and if the mic was this far away from me, it'd be clear and it'd be fine. But the closer the mic gets to my mouth, the deeper my voice is going to sound. boom, 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 boom. All right. That's proximity effect. All right. And that's the nature of some of these polar patterns that these mics have. Well, by eliminating the polar pattern, I can get up here and it's still going to be pretty clear. All right. And so by having an omnidirectional mic, a lot of times you kind of have to weigh the risk of, well, I'm going to pick up all of the room, but if you've got the mic so close to the source, the ratio of the source versus the room is still going to be in your favor. And so sometimes having an omnidirectional mic really close to the source allows you to capture it without all that proximity effect and making everything sound boomy. And so that's kind of how I use omnidirectionals all the time.
Cool. And I just wanted to say too, Patrick is at Lanier High School.
Oh, we lost him again.
County, just to let you know where he's coming from. He's at Lanier High School.
Oh.
I'm sorry. I'm using this crappy brewery like Wi-Fi, so I'm coming in and out. Okay. Other questions? Keep it. That's right. More anybody else? More questions?
I'll bite again. So I have a console, and M32R, so one of the Midas consoles that we got 2 years ago when I started the program. And I love using consoles. I like doing like live sound. Like that's what I really love doing. So I really would like to get my kids on it more. So I'm curious, how do you deal with maybe not having enough consoles for everybody, but being able to rotate through a lot of people? So kind of what would be your take on that, of having really kind of one console to work with and a bunch of students?
Oh man, that's a good question. Basically I would, so it's a digital console, right? I think
correct. Yeah.
So there should be a way where you can record, a previous performance and have it on a USB drive where it shows back up on the console. Maybe that's the best way to do it, where you give each student 5-10 minutes and they have, all the instruments in front of them, or you could even plug an interface up if you've got a recording and you could break out the individual tracks, maybe, a pair of drum tracks and some bass and some things, and just give each one of them a few minutes just to kind of get used to the tactile nature of it, and maybe show them how to use the auxes. Beyond that, man, that's a constant struggle. When Tweed recording kicks off this next semester in January, I give it, a week and a half, and every one of the studio slots is going to be filled because every one of the students is going to be fighting for every bit of console time they have. So you've reached an age-old issue in terms of audio recording education.
Yeah, so that's kind of what I was already doing. I grabbed some multi-tracks from that Cambridge MT site and then threw them into Logic and then used the outputs. So that was kind of where I already was. I was just curious.
Yeah, I mean, that's the way I think that it probably would be the best to work. I'll brainstorm about that, and if I know something, I'll let Heath know, and he can pass it on to you.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.